Hey everyone, in this video we're going to be talking about story elements and plot, and everything at the beginning of the video is going to be focused on story elements, and then in the middle to the end of the video we're going to be looking at plot. So there are 5 main story elements that we just have to go over before we can jump into plot. I just like to combine them all together because they kind of go hand in hand. So it's important that we just note that everything on the left side involves story elements, and then when I shift to plot, you're going to start working on the right side. And you'll notice this time I've also numbered everything out for you, and I've also filled in certain sections just to make sure that you know where we are and to make taking some of the notes easier. I still do want a summary at the end, and then I do want you to answer these 3 questions mainly as we go through the video. So as we start here, all right, story elements. So story elements are the pieces or parts of a story, and there are 5 types of main story elements, and those are setting, characters, conflict, theme, and plot. Now, our first one of these, of course, is I want to answer this question. What do you already know about character setting, plot, conflict, and theme? So go ahead and write that in that number 1 on the left side all the way towards the bottom. That's the first question. So go ahead and pause the video, turn and talk to a friend, or answer it on your own. But what do we already know about character setting, plot, conflict, and theme? All right, so now that you have that question answered, let's move on here to setting. So setting is where, you'll see the word where there on the left, the story takes place, when the story takes place, and how long the story lasts. So this is time, place, and duration. Where, when, and how. And it's important to note all 3. You need to know that you're in New York City in 1928, and the story is going to last for 1 week. Okay? Now, moving forward with characters. Characters are those who play a role in the story. That's your number 1. Your number 2, I think I did for you. As a reader, you need to focus on character traits or their personality. And then your number 3 here, these will usually have to be inferred. And we'll talk more about these character traits as we move into characterization. I just need you understanding that there are characters in a story. And the main characters, there are always going to be two main characters. You might already know who they are, but just in case, here they are right here. There are the protagonist and the antagonist. Now, the protagonist is who we root for as a reader, the character's life we have been given inner access to, and they are not always the good guy. And I want you to make sure you understand that. So like when you think of Fast and the Furious, right? Vin Diesel in Fast and Furious, Dominic Toretto, he's not always the good guy. Sometimes he's the bad guy. Well, not sometimes, he is technically the bad guy, and the cops should be the good guys. But in this instance, the cops are the antagonists. The characters who stand in the way of the protagonist, this character usually creates a conflict for the protagonist. You have to have both in a story. You have to have a protagonist and you have to have an antagonist, or the story does not work. Now, we'll talk again more about that when we get into characterization. So conflict, the major problems or complications the characters face. I believe I did 2 again for you. There is some type of struggle going on with the character, and this drives the plot and makes the story interesting. Now, with conflict, just the main thing we need to know right now, we'll have conflict notes later, but the main thing we need to know right now is there can be more than one problem in a story, but our main conflict is what drives the entire story, drives the plot that we're going to talk about here in a second. So with that main conflict, you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. There are minor conflicts that really don't go anywhere, right? You got into a fender bender, or you didn't have enough money at the store to buy something, or you didn't eat dinner that night. These are like minor conflicts. The major conflict is, somebody kidnapped somebody that you're really close to, and you need to find out who that kidnapped. I just watched a movie about that. That's why I'm thinking about kidnapping. Now, theme is the lesson that you learn. It's a unifying idea or moral of the story. Both of these should be done for you. It's an underlying meaning that oftentimes needs to be inferred. Now, our goal is to try to get into theme in Unit 3. If we don't get into theme in Unit 3 because of time, we'll get into Unit 3 later on. Not Unit 3. We'll get into theme later on in the year. Theme is tough. Theme is one of the harder skills this year. So we just want to kind of talk about it now. Yes, my dogs are trying to join in on the video. And then our last one, which is going to encompass the rest of our video here, is plot. Now, plot is the sequence of events in a story. It's how the story develops, unfolds, and moves through time. So to continue with plot, it is the structure or organization of events in a story. I'm just giving you all these different ways to start thinking about plot. How is the story structured? Think of it These next two should be done for you as a roadmap to get you from point A to point B, or from the start to the finish, right? That is plot. Now, basically, it's what happens in the story. So plot, beginning, middle, and end of a story, right? So that's what we're going to talk about here. Plot is the beginning, the middle, and end of a story. You really have to have all these three. Now, they may be told in different ways. There are plenty of stories out there that tell plot in different ways, but they are just going to town. These dogs. There must be somebody outside. It is made up of 5 main parts, and we're about to get into those 5 main parts. And one of these events, or one of these parts, must lead into the next event or the next part. It has to happen that way. All right. So looking here, exposition leads into the rising action, leads into the climax, leads into the falling action, leads into the resolution. Those are plot. This is your plot diagram. We're going to be using these here very shortly when we go into practicing plot. So now when we look at plot, our first part of plot, the exposition, also known as the beginning of the story. Now in this exposition, you are introduced to the characters, conflict, and setting. If you do not have these 3 things introduced in the beginning of a story, you do not have a story. It doesn't go anywhere. All right. Helps give meaning to the actions that take place later in the story. So for example, in the Avengers Infinity War, if Thanos doesn't steal the Infinity Stones and get rid of half of the universe's population of people, or half the universe's population, I want to say people, then you don't have a conflict. The Avengers shake hands with Thanos and everything moves on and there's no problem. If you do not have a setting, a place where it happens, then you don't have a story to begin with. And of course, if you don't have the characters Thanos and the Avengers, if it's just Thanos doing stuff and no one else is there, then there's no story. You have to have both things for there to be a story. They are just not going to stop. I'm so sorry for the barking. Now with rising action, this is the events leading to the turning point. So the turning point of the story is the climax. We're going to talk about that here in a second. So this is where the conflict starts to develop. Just give me one split. It was a cat. I had to pause the video. It was a cat. They just couldn't stop barking at a cat. So anyways, rising action, the events leading to the turning point, the conflicts start to develop, and obstacles and problems are introduced that stand in the way of the main character reaching the goal. So this is where this is one of the hardest things for people to get right, because you get the conflict introduced, all right? So, for example, I'm going back to the kidnapping thing earlier. Someone that you're really close to was kidnapped. Boom, our story is now going to start moving up, all right? Now we got to try to find out who did the kidnapping. What do the kidnappers want? Where are they located? Where is the person that I need to find? And we're slowly building up. But the conflict, until that conflict ends, until you get to the point where you are face to face with the kidnapper, face to face with like rescuing the person that you're really close to, it's still building. So whatever that conflict is, it's just the hardest part, is following it up there. Same thing with a superhero story, right? Spider-Man. If Spider-Man's fighting the Green Goblin or Spider-Man's fighting Vulture, until that final fight, until Vulture is defeated, the conflict is not over. It can still be exciting in this rising action, but it's not done until we get to the climax, also known as the turning point. Now we're at a point now where I have defeated the villain, or I'm fighting the villain, or whoever it is, and now we're going to start to go down after that fight. It's the pivotal moment, right? Whatever that main conflict is, it is coming to an end. It is the most intense moment, and then the main character gets changed in some way. They learn something about themselves, they learn something about all this stuff, but this is that climax of the story, okay? It is hard. We'll talk about it in small group. Falling action, this is what happens after the main problem of the story has been solved. So directly resulting after that climax, now we're moving down. What are the results of it? What's the results of defeating Vulture? What's the result of rescuing the person that you love who was kidnapped? It satisfies the reader's desire to know what happens, because you always want to know what happens after that climax. You can't just end at the climax and the story is over. We have to kind of come down, cool down a little bit, and we learn a lot about the characters and the theme in this part of the story. Again, we're going to talk more about characters and theme later in the year. Right now, we're just kind of focusing on following these events, following this conflict throughout the story. And then, of course, everyone seems to always remember this term, resolution. This is the point that the conflict has been resolved and the story has reached its end. So there is no more conflict, there is no more any of this, and we are very at the end, and we're tying up our loose ends. Everything is resolved, and the story comes to a reasonable conclusion. All right, so that's very quickly the 5 terms that we were looking at. Okay, the 5 main terms that we were looking at. And when it comes to the definitions, the main meaning, it's your number ones on each of these slides. So if we come back to here, what happens that's the number 1. Okay, that's what we're looking for when it comes to our mastery check here in a second, is these number ones. All right, so anyway, last little thing here is, why is plot important? And you're just going to do a quick write on your page. Why is plot structure important? Why is it so important to know the beginning, the middle, and the end? Why is it so important to follow the conflict? This video went longer than I wanted, but I did talk about 2 main skills, so I hope we're probably not going to get through this in one day, but that's okay. We'll probably get some of this after the test and the rest of this on Thursday. All right, thank you all for watching. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know. Bye, everybody.